For some of us older grapplers that have been around Jiu-Jitsu for a while, I think we've seen Jiu-Jitsu evolve and change quite a bit over the years and developed into this more modern Jiu-Jitsu game that a lot of people practice. And I was talking to my coach Chewy on the podcast, and we were just kind of mulling over, training philosophies, and we were talking about, old school modern Jiu-Jitsu and the distinction between the two and philosophies around both of those, almost like subsets in Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu has evolved for a lot of reasons. You got to look at why people enter into Jiu-Jitsu. A lot of people nowadays aren't just getting into Jiu-Jitsu for self-defense or to learn how to fight MMA. You've got a lot of recreational people coming into Jiu-Jitsu. They just want to do something that's challenging or learn a new skill or even compete and win tournaments. So whatever your reasons are, that's going to kind of dictate maybe the style of Jiu-Jitsu that you play. And also, with the explosion of resources, with YouTube, with instructionals, it only makes sense that Jiu-Jitsu would evolve and quote unquote modernize into some of the techniques and the skills that you see today. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about the distinctions between old school Jiu-Jitsu and modern Jiu-Jitsu and just kind of touch on those. And I don't think one is right or wrong. I think that, it depends on the purpose and your purpose for training. Again, certain gyms have a certain philosophy, and some practitioners that have been around for a while may have a certain philosophy on good positions or bad positions in Jiu-Jitsu or ways to train. But I think that more often than not, you're going to find the style and the type of training and the skills that speak to you, that kind of feel good to you. So I think that whatever that is for you, go with it and see where it takes you. So anyways, let's get into some of the differences, between old school Jiu-Jitsu and modern Jiu-Jitsu. I would say a big distinction between old school and modern Jiu-Jitsu is your reason for training, like we kind of mentioned. So old school Jiu-Jitsu, I think, is more geared towards self-defense and fighting. You've got, if you look at the early UFCs, you've got style versus style. So the Gracies went out to prove that Jiu-Jitsu was the best style for self-defense and for fighting, and they proved that early on for sure. And then, with the evolution of MMA, different techniques and skill sets and people blending everything into MMA, purely having Jiu-Jitsu necessarily wasn't always the best style to have. However, initially, Jiu-Jitsu was kind of shown as this great self-defense form of martial arts, a good way to protect yourself. And you got to look at the positioning. I think old school Jiu-Jitsu was more geared towards closed guard, top mount, back mount, not a lot of these different positions that we'll get into in just a moment, but more of those basic positions, probably top mount, closed guard, top and bottom, side control, knee on belly, some of those kind of positions, back mount, those are going to be more geared towards basic kind of old school Jiu-Jitsu. Now, when we look at modern Jiu-Jitsu, you're going to see a lot of evolution of different guards. You have a lot of leg locks and leg entanglements that come into play. So I think that with those different skill sets, it's for a different purpose. Now, again, don't get me wrong, leg locks can absolutely be used in a street fight, an MMA fight, a confrontation. But again, maybe they weren't originally seen as the best positions for that in a self-defense environment where you might be on the ground, on your back, with somebody being able to strike you. So, but with the evolution of tournaments, of sport Jiu-Jitsu, I guess you can say, which is more, I think, along the lines of modern Jiu-Jitsu, you start to see that different rule sets come into play, whether it's points, whether it's submission only, EBI, now you have the Craig Jones invitation where you use the pit and you have kind of these slanted walls and even sometimes grappling done in like an octagon or a cage. So I think you start to see the different rule sets dictate how people play Jiu-Jitsu, and besides that, why people enter into grappling or Jiu-Jitsu altogether. A lot of kids are into Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of women are into Jiu-Jitsu now. A lot of older athletes are now training Jiu-Jitsu. So you're seeing not just like these younger individuals that are coming in just trying to learn to fight and to protect or defend themselves. You're still seeing some of that for sure. People use jiu-jitsu for self-defense, but a lot of it is now there's a sport aspect. There's these rule sets that you have to adhere to, and you start to play and develop techniques along those rule sets that are going to play into those rule sets and help you win, essentially. So lapel guards, you know, that's another one, worm guard, things like that. Those are all kind of things that you start to see developed for more sport jiu-jitsu or modern jiu-jitsu aspect. I think one basic idea in old school jiu-jitsu, and you heard a lot, I heard it a lot as a newer grappler, was position before submission. You know, making sure you have a dominant position or positional control in some capacity, which is very useful, obviously in a street fight or a self-defense type situation. Again, you technically wouldn't really want to pull guard in a street fight. You don't want to be on your back. If you have to be, you know, obviously you can use a closed guard or some type of guard situation where you control posture to help yourself stay safe and mitigate strikes, things like that. But in modern jiu-jitsu, you see a lot of people pull guard, and they'll sit to guard, and they'll do things like that where they invert and get in some positions that aren't ideal in a street fight. So, but they can be very useful in a sport or competition setting. So you got to think about strategy again that goes into play for those aspects as well. So, but I do think like if you're someone that's into jiu-jitsu just for the sport aspect and you're going against, you're in a street fight or an altercation where the other person doesn't know jiu-jitsu, if you have a basic understanding, you're probably a blue belt level, upper white belt, blue belt level, you should be pretty okay in a self-defense scenario, because a lot of the early on techniques you'll learn are closed guard. They're some of these more, I think, self-defense or old school type positions that you're going to find yourself in. So I think that even if you don't go into jiu-jitsu for the self-defense aspect, you go in for more of a sport aspect or competitive aspect, you're still going to have a decent skill set to control someone, to submit them, and hopefully keep yourself safe. I mean, there are some differences we got to look at. You know, spacing is a big thing. You want to kind of make sure that the spacing in a street fight is either very, very close in or far away to where someone can't strike you. So that's something to think about and be able to adjust. But I think most practitioners that have some experience in jiu-jitsu will be able to hopefully understand that distance if they train that a little bit and be able to be okay in a self-defense scenario. So I guess those are the main differences between old school and more modern new school jiu-jitsu. Of course, purpose and techniques and positions are going to be kind of a huge player in those. But again, if you're someone that's in jiu-jitsu, it's all jiu-jitsu, right? Like, keep learning, do what feels good to you, do what you enjoy, keep training, stay on the mats. And so those are kind of some ideas on the differences between old school and modern jiu-jitsu. If you have some different ideas, if you think there's some differences or some other aspects I didn't discuss, or if you like one better than the other, tell me why in the comments, let me know. And thank you guys for checking out the video. Talk to you next time.